If you have an online business, by virtue of you being online, you're kind of open for business globally. Over the last several years, there's been so many changes that have just made merchants' lives harder when it comes to being compliant. The bigger that merchants get, the more sophisticated their businesses get. And if you think about post-COVID, there's been so much more demand online. And you can't just operate on a single channel. You have to be in multiple channels. It's almost absurd to think that you could do that manually and not have some tax problem. If your business is growing and if you're trying to expand globally, make sure you're thinking about any compliance triggers. It's way easier to solve it up front before you trigger any audit issues than it is having to retroactively solve for that.
Meg Higgins, SVP Avalara, welcome to the DTC Podcast. Super nice to have you here. I was just going over your LinkedIn ahead of time. You've been in the SaaS game in the e-commerce space for a minute, it feels like. Can you walk us through a bit of your hero's journey to Avalara?
Yeah, really nice to be here, Eric. Thank you for having me. So I have been in and around technology my entire career. So I'm dating myself now, but we're going on 30 years. So it's been a journey. Definitely in the SaaS space, at least for the last 10. So it's been great. And I spent, prior to coming to Avalara, I spent the bulk of my career and my focus in and around e-commerce and supply chain and logistics and so forth. And then, the last 5 years, I've enjoyed being here at Avalara, which has been great.
So give me a high-level overview of maybe what brought you to the opportunity at Avalara, how you recognized that it was something that the industry needed.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I was in e-commerce, and specifically I was in cross-border e-commerce. And so there's a lot of tangential synergies between what Avalara is and was doing and what I was doing in cross-border. So we really crossed paths, the Avalara team and myself, because they were looking to try to go deeper into cross-border. When you think about tax complexities and what we're trying to solve for every day at Avalara, being able to transact globally and doing that digitally, that requires a lot of the same tools and a lot of the same solutions that I was working on with retailers over in my prior business. And so that's really how we kind of came together, because the founder, Scott McFarlane, he and I knew each other, and he had just mentioned to me, I'm really interested in wanting to build out a cross-border business here at Avalara. I think there's so much that we can do as part of our mission to really solve for every transaction in the world. And we need cross-border capability. And I had been in the business for a long time, and I agreed. I think that there is so much overlap, and the solution that whether you're transacting digitally or whether you're just you're a physical business and you're still trying to do things, overseas and crossing borders, you need a lot of the same capabilities. So it made a lot of sense.
So talk to me about the headache that is cross-border tax compliance.
So because your audience is obviously digital merchants, heavily weighted in e-commerce, I'll answer it in that context. If you have an online business, by virtue of you being online, you're kind of open for business globally. Unless you state explicitly on your website, I don't ship or I don't process international orders, which really nowadays, I rarely see that. I mean, you used to see that 10, 15 years ago because it was just hard and difficult, and a lot of merchants decided to elect out of that. But nowadays, you have to be open for business. People around the globe are finding you, and they're doing that through search. They're doing that through product discovery and influencer discovery. And so you have to be available to service that global buyer. And when you think about that, the first thing is, can the product physically be shipped? So if I'm going to buy the product, can it be shipped? And when you think about crossing borders and doing cross-border e-commerce, you have to know the product composition. So you have to be able to say, here's what this product is made of, which allows you to put an HS code or what's required on the customs paperwork to be able to disclose, here's what's in the box and here's what this item is made of. And that then translates into, okay, well, how much is duties and taxes, which is, locally determined? That's all off of that HS code. So you have to be able to really classify your catalog. Then you got to be able to figure out how much it's going to cost. And buyers nowadays need that cost transparency. There's so much shopping that they'll do across platforms and marketplaces. And so if they really want that product, they'll find the best deal. And that deal has to be inclusive of all the fully burdened cost. So the fully landed cost, as the industry calls it. But without that, then you're avoiding or potentially introducing a lot of surprises to the buyers. And that's never good. There's been so many stories, and I can tell you that because I was in that space for a long time, where buyers would purchase an item only to find out that they had to pay a really hefty fee once it was delivered. And I'm sure you can attest to this, Eric. You're in Vancouver too, so you know how this works.
I just bought this watch and it was like $150 or something that I had to pay after the fact. I'm like, this is no longer a good deal.
Exactly. And so you probably either one, you wouldn't have bought the item, or two, you probably would have bought it from a different merchant.
Mm-hmm.
Had you known
if it was transparent,
had it was transparent. And so there's that. And then once you actually purchase it and get through checkout, the other component is currencies. And so, it's easier certainly in our neighboring country of Canada to US, but for US based merchants, if you're trying to ship into Korea, if you're trying to ship into, Germany as an example, not everybody takes Visa, right? Not everybody operates on those same currencies. And so you really have to have currency. You have to have different payment methods. And then you have to have a carrier and a transportation option that is traceable, that is able to move swiftly through customs. And, back in the day, I can say this because it was a long time ago. I mean, we used to have delivery timelines that was like 12 to 21 days, which was acceptable, believe it or not, to a buyer. But there's nobody that's going to wait 3 weeks nowadays for a package. Like, that's just crazy. So you have to really find those local carriers that service the market, that will give you traceability of the package, and that will do it in a speed that is more reasonable than years ago.
Now, this is all cross-border, but Avalara, I know you focus heavily on even just the intricacies of tax compliance within the United States. So talk to me about what someone who's not shipped to all 50 some odd states needs to know about tax compliance.
Yeah, so it is equally hard here. So it's fascinating that I went from an industry where cross-border had a ton of friction and a ton of pain for merchants to try to operate. And now on this side of the fence, you have to deal with that almost every day. And so over the last several years, there's been so many changes that have just made merchants' lives harder when it comes to being compliant. So if you think about a few things, one is economic nexus. So Wayfair was a big watershed event that happened. And what that really did is it changed the rules where you used to be obligated for tax if you had a physical presence or if you had employees that, with a physical presence. Now there's this concept of economic nexus. And what economic nexus is that by state, they dictate what those thresholds are of the sales in that state that you now have a tax obligation for. And we have a lot of states, a lot of different rules. Those rules are changing. And so you now as a merchant have to be able to figure out across all of the different platforms that you might operate. So it's not just your web store. It might also be marketplaces that you also list your products on. You have to figure out the aggregation of your sales and whether or not you've triggered any of these nexus rules. And if so, you have tax obligations. And what does that mean? That means you got to make sure you're registered. That means that you got to make sure that you're figuring out, okay, what part do I have to collect and what part do I have to remit? Versus if I'm on Amazon or if I'm on eBay, okay, well, the marketplace is doing that for me. That's great. So I got to net that out. And then you have to track your filing obligations. And it's a lot. It's a lot. And if you have any diversity or change in your catalog, which you can appreciate this, Eric, like most merchants do nowadays. I mean, you can't keep your catalog pretty stale, right? I mean, you have to continue to think about ways to add more products. Maybe you're even sourcing third-party products. And when you do that, you have to make sure that you're always thinking about, okay, what is the tax code associated with that? How do I make sure that I have the right tax code so that minimally I'm collecting tax correctly on those items as well.
Do you think there are a lot of brands out there that overlook this up into a certain scale? Are brands kind of snoozing on this a little bit, or are they like even before Avalara? Because Avalara automates this process, is my understanding. What are brands doing before they get Avalara? Are they doing this by hand, or are they snoozing on it a bit?
It's a great question. I think it's all the above. I think there are absolutely brands that are snoozing on it, that are hoping that they're sort of below the threshold where the states aren't paying too close of attention to them. And there are hundreds of thousands of those merchants that are probably skating right at that threshold level and thinking, I'll roll the dice. We certainly saw that all the time in cross-border, that I'd rather, even buyers would say, I'd rather not prepay duties and taxes. I'd rather roll the dice and hope that I don't have to be collected at the door. And it's no different in sales tax compliance too. So there's that cohort. There's a cohort that is just doing it wrong, thinking they're doing it right because they either, don't have all of the tax codes correctly on their catalog. They might think that I'm using a tax rate and tax table, which aligns, or a zip code based tax rule versus a tax jurisdiction rule. So there's all sorts of inaccuracies there. So you could be doing it, but you've got error prone. Particularly if you're doing it manually. The bigger that merchants get, the more sophisticated their businesses get. And if you think about, post-COVID, there's been so much more demand online. There's been so much more opportunity to be, and you can't just operate on a single channel. You have to be in multiple channels. You have to be able to, really syndicate your catalog. You have to even think about point of sale and having some type of physical presence too. If you take that all into the equation, it's almost absurd to think that you could do that manually and not have some tax problem. And we know because we work with our partners. I mean, Avalara has enjoyed a really amazing partner business, which I'm so lucky to lead, but we hear it every day from our partners. Every day, their customers are struggling with this problem. So it is a very pervasive, ubiquitous issue.
And what are the risks? Is it a risk if you get audited? Is it a risk you're paying too much or being inefficient? Like, what are the risks for companies that might be skating on this right now?
It's audit risk. And consequences of that is, depending upon the duration that you've been doing it incorrectly, you can't go back to a buyer from a year and a half ago and say, I forgot to charge a tax, or I didn't charge a tax, and now I need to think about going back and collecting, those dollars. Like, that buyer is long gone. So your ability to collect tax on post transactions is just not available to you. And so generally it equates to a potentially a pretty heavy tax bill. Now, there's ways that you can negotiate that. You can, we have a service of, voluntary disclosure service where you could work with us and say, okay, I think I've been doing it wrong. Help me understand, what potentially my obligations are. And then anonymously, we can work with, those merchants or those companies on their behalf and try to negotiate some type of settlement, really, and then get them back, set up, registered, get their catalogs, set up in the right way, and then make sure that they're now operating much more efficiently. But yeah, that one-time tax audit or burden could be quite painful.
And then can you share a couple surprising examples of tax nuances that we've discussed?
Yeah, there's a lot. So my team gave me a few examples, and I'll share them with you here. But there's an example in New York. So, and I used to work in Manhattan, that if you were to purchase a bagel unsliced, it's not taxable. But if you purchase that bagel sliced and toasted, it's now subject to tax. Orange juice is taxed more than 300 separate ways in the US alone. In California, fruit sold in a vending machine is taxable versus fruit sold at a grocery store is exempt. And the last one, which I think is crazy, in some states, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, which doesn't have flour, may be taxed differently than a Twix bar, which contains flour, because Reese's would be considered under the definition of candy, while Twix would not.
It's a cookie.
It's cookie.
Because it's not flour. Oh,
well,
my God.
Flour. I don't even know. So
That's
really
hilarious.
That. But try to figure that out. And by the way, those examples, you can multiply that by 10,000. I mean, we have 14,000 sales tax jurisdictions in the US alone that are all independently operating and at times setting their own rules. So that's bananas.
So we've outlined the problem. Now walk me through how Avalara simplifies this and makes this headache go away.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, we have all the tools depending on where you are in your journey as a business. So we've worked with really early stage startups all the way through to very complex, multinational enterprise organizations. So we tailor our, what you're going to need based upon where you are in that journey. And it starts with figuring out your Nexus profile and figuring out, okay, where do you have tax obligations? And we actually, we offer that. There's tools on our website. So you can go there today onto avalara.com and you can start to do some of this on your own. And there's great sources of information. We have blogs. We have all sorts of great free information. So I would say, for any of your audience that wants to just, start the process, they can go there first. Then you have to kind of go through and say, all right, if I do have Nexus obligations and if I do have some things that I'm potentially not doing right, great. Let me think about the litany of solutions that I'm going to need. You got to get registered. We have a registration service. You're going to need to be able to get your cataloged with the right tax codes. We can support you there. We have invested heavily into AI that really helps augment that in a super efficient digital way. And so, we do a lot of technology innovation around being able to keep, catalogs classified in real time and so forth. Secondly, you can leverage any of the integrations that we have. We have thousands of integrations into multiple applications. So if you're early in your journey, we work with e-com platforms like BigCommerce, we work with WooCommerce, we work with so many different companies. And as you scale your business, you're going to need point of sale integrations, you're going to need CRM integrations, you're going to need ERP integrations, in addition to other, e-com friendly platforms. And so all of those integrations are readily available, so you can add as your business grows. And then lastly, I would say all the things that surround that, all the solutions around filing, around insights and so forth, all of that is housed within our platform.
Super cool. And you also work with, you were saying like huge enterprise organizations, but also marketplaces, which I feel like is a big vote of confidence for your software if you've actually got huge marketplaces using this as well. Yeah.
So several years ago, it's actually right before I joined Avalara. So I joined in 2019, but several years ago, there was another change that happened, a very, big watershed change that was called marketplace facilitation laws. And what that really was is states realized it was really expensive to try to find all of the individual sellers on all of the marketplaces and try to hold them accountable for sales tax obligations. And so what they did is they looked at these marketplaces or platforms that were aggregating all of these sales and said, you know what? You need to be the platform that charges sales tax and that is liable and accountable to pay sales tax on behalf of your merchants. I don't want to chase all those small merchants. And so that was really a massive change that happened. And so they went from, I just need to be able to calculate tax, and then everybody that's on my platform is figuring out either whether I'm going to, charge it, whether I'm not going to charge it, what I'm going to charge. And that's up to the merchant and their obligations to be able to collect it, do it right, and then pay it. Now that flipped over to marketplaces. So they went from really being a platform that is agnostic to being accountable to getting it right and needing to source their own technology to get that right. And so we've really partnered quite closely with those marketplaces over the years and work with many of them to do just that.
Any examples of big tax compliance mistakes that you've seen D2C brands make as they scale?
I'd say the biggest one is just not collecting tax or thinking if I just use a flat rate table, it'll be fine. So, I've told this story before, but a couple of years ago, it was right during COVID, I purchased a dining room table and dining room set. And I am a digital native and I do everything digitally. I hate the retail experience. And so if I can buy everything online, I always will. And so I'm pretty savvy around shopping and making, like, I knew what table I wanted. And I was like, spent days trying to figure out where's my best deal. And there was this one company that was actually based in Long Island near me, and they weren't charging sales tax. And it was material because the dining room set was expensive. And I remember talking to them and I said, so you don't have sales tax? And they said, no, we don't have to charge sales tax. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you totally do. But I like as a consumer that you're not charging me sales tax. So I went ahead and I gave them the purchase, but I was thinking, I really feel badly like I know that they're going to have the sales tax obligation at some point down the road. So I think just assuming that you can do it either manually or assuming that, you don't have an obligation, I think is absolutely probably the most prominent issue we see.
We never really talk about politics on the D2C podcast, but with the new election in the United States and tariffs coming in, are there any? I guess we're talking about state level taxes, which aren't really maybe affected federally. But do you foresee any sort of changes coming to the industry in the next little while?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I mean, it's been quite a week this week.
Yeah,
I would say for sure we're going to see an impact. To what degree at a state level, I don't know. I think that's probably above anything that I could potentially predict. But I do believe that crossing borders, imports, I mean, that would, some of those folks ran on that as a campaign, theme. And I think that that's absolutely something that's going to happen. So ideally, we should see people that are sourcing and manufacturing locally and not necessarily from, that particular region. We should see them thrive. So it's been a while since I've been in cross-border, but I still keep in touch with a lot of friends, and the imports have been insane. I mean, we even saw this during, some of the shutdown at the ocean freights and so forth, right? So when that got backed up, I mean, it's amazing the impact that had. And so that's all coming from, China and those regions. So I think if the import taxes spike the way that they're intended to go, that will absolutely have an impact.
Brave new world indeed. I just think there's probably a lot of listeners out there that might be skating on their sales tax. I feel like I would be skating on my sales tax if I was selling a physical product rather than media.
Yeah.
What's it like? So you come in to Avalara, you get your sort of assessment meeting, and then you're sort of parsed into the various areas that you need. Like, what's the onboard experience like? Is my question.
Yeah. So I mean, it certainly depends, right? So we have a lot of close partner relationships, as I mentioned, one of which is Shopify. So we love working with our Shopify friends, and there's a lot of changes that we're doing there with Shopify, but I'll take that as an example. So you would be able to choose Avalara inside of the Shopify experience, as part of your admin console. And then when you do that, you would be directed to one of our dedicated Shopify sales folks and our solution folks, and we'll walk you through what you might need. So all of the tech integration sits within Shopify. So Shopify and Avalara work really close to make sure that you don't necessarily have to do anything bespoke with us directly. It's all within your Shopify integration, but you would work with us to make sure that we configure the right solution for you, that we set you up with the right usage plan, that we make sure that, what else are you doing in your business that you might need that we can help you with. And that process is, as quick as you want it to be, depending upon the simplicity of the business. And the integration is built in such a way that it doesn't take months to do. It really could be done in days. It really depends on the complexity of your catalog. It depends on the complexity and the footprint of the various applications that you want tying into the tax system. But we have, we've enjoyed a wonderful partnership with Shopify, and we have many, many merchants, some that are small and have been, easy to solve for that integration, and some that are quite big, and it takes a while to get it right.
So I know you promoted in our newsletter a downloadable, the new sales tax landscape for e-commerce folks. So we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes here. You also mentioned your risk calculator on your website. I think that might be a really great way for listeners to go check out avalara.com. Go plug in some details on the risk calculator. And otherwise, any final words maybe for brands heading into Q4 first and then and 2025?
Well, I would just say if you aren't already thinking about what you're going to have to do, if your business is growing and if you're trying to expand globally, make sure you're thinking about any compliance triggers. It's way easier to solve it up front before you trigger any audit issues than it is having to retroactively solve for that. So that would be my advice for all your friends.
And we started talking globally and then we drilled in on the US, but this is like Avalara is sort of a one-stop shop for a lot of so you're also handling the tax variations within the EU, for instance.
Yes. We have a global platform that does VAT calculations. One of the other themes happening globally is around e-invoicing. And so for anyone that is operating abroad, that you'll start to hear that come out more and more. And so there are mandates that are happening in some of these countries like France and Germany, and that's going to require a different way that you need to transact. You're going to have to send your invoices real time to those tax authorities, and it's tricky and it's complicated. So, but all of that capability, is all resident within Avalara. So it's been, for merchants that are early in their journey, for merchants that are enterprise level that need to be able to expand into another market, or they want to be able to, now move into different sectors. Everything is available for them if they are interested in working with Avalara.
I talk to a lot of different SaaS brands, hear a lot of interesting SaaS brand names, and I got to say Avalara is like a really sort of aesthetically, sonically pleasing name to say. So whoever named it, great job.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that is our genius founder, Scott. He also chose this color orange because he wanted to make sure that we stood out at trade shows. And that worked, back in the day when internet retailer was a thing. So IRCE, remember those years? We were always at that booth that had the tiki hut and had the margarita machine flowing, and everybody else was in like gray and black and blue. And then there was this orange tribe that stood out. And so all the credit goes to him.
I love that. I love good trade show booths as well. Were you guys at Shop Talk?
So we were at Shop Talk this year. Shop Talk has changed over the years, and I think we're still.
Tell me about that.
So, I've been in e-commerce forever, right? And so I remember IRCE was like the place to be, and then Shop Talk kind of came in sideways and started to, take over that audience, and it was a better show, and Shop Talk was always awesome. And then you had COVID, and then Shop Talk kind of lost its luster. And then we went right after COVID. We participated in Shop Talk, and it wasn't great. It wasn't well attended. Then we went this past year, and it was good. So now we're like, all right, like maybe it was a bad year. We're still trying to figure out if we're going back, but it's not cheap. It's a pretty pricey show to be at. So that's the other component that we're deliberating on.
Well, if you are listening to this, you can go to avalara.com or follow the links that we'll post in the show notes here. Megan is on LinkedIn. Can people follow you there? Would you recommend?
I would love it. Yes, I'm on LinkedIn.
Nice. We'll throw your link there. Maybe add me so that when we promote this episode, we can connect. And otherwise, thanks so much for coming on the DTC podcast today, Megan. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks so much, Eric. Anytime. I would love to do it anytime. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.